Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Memory loss. Many of us believe that we're supposed to be experiencing a little bit of memory loss as we get older. But that isn't true according to a Harvard study from a neuroscientist where they discovered that long-term meditators have been able to increase the volume in key areas of the brain, such as the frontal cortex. This is an area that typically shrinks with age, making it harder to remember things. But some 50-year-old meditators have the same size prefrontal cortex as a 25-year-old. So imagine that you're able to remember, perhaps be even sharper than somebody half your age. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is an internationally recognized stress management expert, corporate trainer, meditation teacher, and author of the critically acclaimed De-stressifying, the real-world guide to personal empowerment, lasting fulfillment, and peace of mind. He's joining us here on the program today as he talks about how we can spend 16 seconds. That's right, not just a few minutes, 5 minutes, or a half hour a day, but just 16 seconds a day to awaken the best self that's within each and every one of us. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Davidji. Davidji, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, do you ever find yourself at least once in a while forgetting what your home phone number is?
I have not forgotten my home phone number, but I have certainly forgotten my keys a whole bunch of times.
You know, I think a lot of us have, actually. I remember there were times, even in my early 20s, I would be walking all over the house, and my girlfriend at the time would go, "Let me guess, you lost your keys again." Now, what's this with 16-second meditations that can clear up people and leave them feeling refreshed? I've never heard of 16 seconds before.
I actually developed this technique when I was teaching members of law enforcement and of the military, because they're pretty resistant to the concept of meditation. There's a bit of a stigma about meditation, that it's a little kooky or too spiritual or out there, or somehow will get in the way of your relationship that you have with God. And so it was really a technique that I initially started so people could just dip their toes in the water of meditation just to see what it felt like. Mm-hmm. And in just 16 seconds, you can feel the power of that practice. And then it's a question of, well, that's a pattern interrupt. Maybe we can introduce that a whole bunch of times throughout the course of the day, or maybe we can learn to extend that, to cultivate that, to bring in more. But why don't we try it right now? All of our listeners can try it along with us. And the only caveat is that you play along. You know, whatever I say, you follow those directions.
And if anybody's driving a car, is that going to be a danger here? If they're mixing, let's say, brownies with an electronic blender, that'll be okay?
No one's going to suddenly levitate or lift off.
Okay, good.
But since everyone will be closing their eyes at some point, if you're driving, do not close your eyes. You can do this with eyes open as well as closed eyes. But first, why don't we place our attention on some either disappointment or frustration or irritation that we've been experiencing over the last few days.
How about the Monday morning blues? That'll be coming up.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Don't go too deep. This isn't therapy. We just want to go back, maybe a day or two or three, something that you didn't think was going to happen happened, or someone said they were going to do something and they didn't. And get clear on that. Get clear on the irritation. You may even see a person's face associated with this disappointment or irritation. And you may even feel it someplace in your body, tightness in your throat or your chest or your belly, something along those lines. And get clear on it. Put it in your mind's eye. And now close your eyes unless you're driving. And through your nose, take a long, slow, deep breath in and watch that breath as it moves down into your belly, and hold it when it gets there. And watch it. And witness it. And now release that breath and observe it as it moves up your chest, into your throat, out through your nostrils, and hold that breath out and watch it. And witness it as it dissipates into the ether. And now breathe normally and open your eyes. So that was 16 seconds. Essentially 4 in, 4 holding, 4 out, 4 holding. And if you were playing along, in those 16 seconds, you totally disconnected from that irritation or that irritating person. If you were playing along, in those 16 seconds, you weren't in the past, you weren't in the future, you were actually fully present. It's impossible for us to actually watch our breath as it moves in and out of us and hold on to a grievance or a fear or some type of other emotion from the past or the future. And so that's 16 seconds. Now that I teach it in the military and with law enforcement, we call it tactical breathing. But whatever you call it, in the business world, I call it 16 seconds to clarity. Because in those 16 seconds, the fact that you were fully present allows you, in your 17th second, on the other side of this little exercise, to be a little clearer, to not be absorbed in the emotions, to not be holding a grudge or a grievance, and to not have the hormones and chemicals dictate what our next step is going to be. So if you do that 4 times in a row, that's a minute. If you do it 20 times, that's 5 minutes. But even if we stopped throughout the course of the day, maybe 5 or 6 times, while we're waiting on a line, while we're stuck in traffic, while we're on the phone with someone, while we're in a meeting, anytime we suddenly feel that, that emotional tell trickling up inside of us, that we're either going to be reactive and bark at somebody or be reactive and shut down and withdraw. If we instead deployed that 16-second technique, it brings us back to the present moment. And there's so many different studies that are going on right now about, what does meditation do to the brain? What does it do to the body? And that's because our technology now allows us to actually look at the brain and see when the fear center activates, to look at the brain and see what happens when people meditate, to look at the brain using MRI, to before, during, and after an extended meditation program or study. So there's so much new science, and it's validating that we have the ability to actually change our genes and to change our brain and truly transform how we remember, think, act, speak, and make choices.
Davidji, it's so true what you're saying about how we're able to see how the brain functions as we're thinking. And an example of that is a television show that I enjoy watching from time to time is House. Are you familiar with that one?
Sure.
Okay.
Laurie.
There was one particular episode, as you were describing that was, that accurately depicts what you're saying here. And that is, it was one about a girl who had some sort of a mental neurosis. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, they had her in an MRI, and they had simply asked her a question or to tell a story that was relating to a trauma that she felt she had suffered. And as she was telling the story, the orderly says, "Hey, take a look at this." She actually was going into, I believe it was her, and I could be wrong about this, but just for the sake of the scenario here, into her hippocampus, which is an area that you actually have creativity and imagination. So it was like they had discovered just through that alone that she was actually making this story up, but believed it.
Right. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yes, our newest science, and one of the most powerful scientific studies, they had, it wasn't a huge study, and that seems to be the problem. So many of the studies that really are so illuminating are small studies. So this was a Harvard, Massachusetts General Hospital, along with Harvard and Yale and a whole bunch of other scientists. And they had 16 test subjects for 8 weeks, 56 days, less than 2 months. And they had them all meditate using mindfulness, which is pretty much, following your breath in and out and being judgment-free during that period of time. Not so easy, but we can talk about that later. But that's essentially what we did for 16 seconds. We were judgment-free, and we were fully engaged in the present moment. So they did MRIs on the brain before, during, and after the 8 weeks. And what they found that every single one, this was unanimous, every single one of the 16 test subjects experienced a shrinkage in their amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for fear, anger, anxiety. And they all experienced an increase in their hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for learning, memory, imagination, hand-eye coordination, spatial orientation. And so we now know that in less than 2 months, if you're willing to show up and do this, and not everyone, is on board with that, giving themselves 30 minutes of following their breath a day. But we know that in that study, it proved that we actually can change the physical structure of our brain in under 2 months simply by doing nothing for 30 minutes a day.
It's so amazing, too. I remember it was a couple of years back, I was doing a segment with a psychologist, actually a psychiatrist, and she had wrote this really wonderful, simple book, and it eludes me what the title was or what it was about, but what really stood out for me in the book was that she talked about the different areas of the brain and what their function actually is, in fairly simple terms. And as I read that, I thought, if people could come to understand this, just as you were describing, what the hippocampus does or the amygdala does, the prefrontal cortex, and how these things really function, sort of to understand their own mind, it would really change a lot of the ways they are in the world, because they can then come to understand, how then can I govern these in such a way that I feel like my mind is serving me rather than me being a slave to my mind, which tends to be the case for a lot of us, where we, as you were saying earlier, react to situation, rather than being, flexible, and resilient when it comes to those kinds of things. And certainly the 16-second technique that you're working with law enforcement and people who work in emergency services, these are people that go out knowing, I'm going out today to do a job that can be very dangerous, where I might not come back home to my family. How then can I best make the decisions, let's say, at the boiling point, where I can come through this clearly and all of us come out of this situation safely?
Right. Right. And it's really, it's one of those super subtle things, because the reason that more people don't practice this is because you don't see that tangible change. It's in your brain. Who's paying attention to physical structural shifts inside our brain? And so we have to the only way we can actually demonstrate that or prove or validate that is to suddenly we don't lose our keys like we do every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning. We suddenly have an easier recall in a particular moment. We're suddenly a little clearer when we're making a decision and not overwhelmed by all those thoughts. We have 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day. That's a thought every 1.2 seconds. They are pouring into us. And so it's really easy to get overwhelmed. It's really easy to have, which is the thought I should choose, as our brain starts to slow down, and specifically that part of the brain, the posterior cingulate gyrus, or the PCG. That's the first area of the brain to diminish in activity when a person gets Alzheimer's disease. So if we can keep that activated on a more consistent basis, they've even shown that people who are starting to experience memory loss, if they just spent an hour online surfing the net, with an agenda, looking around for things, they start to activate the PCG, the posterior cingulate gyrus, and that can actually help slow the decline in a person's memory, and that can actually arrest it and start to increase, make memory better. But we know that there's a daily practice that you can use, just like brushing your teeth. It's a daily practice, and we use it to keep our teeth, to keep our breath fresh, to keep us from getting cavities. We don't actually brush when the dentist says, ooh, you have a cavity, and then we run home to brush. We've been brushing proactively to prevent that. And it's the same thing. If we can proactively introduce a pattern interrupt every single day, and I suggest that people learn to meditate for longer than 16 seconds. And when I'm teaching the military, we do 16 seconds the first week. The next week we add a minute. The week after that we add a minute. And suddenly, by the time we're halfway through the year, you've got Marines meditating for 25 minutes a day.
Wow. And it's interesting because I know that you travel around the world, and you basically, what you do is you help people to be able to do this here. As you've done that, what would you say commonly from people, and I'm sure, does anybody in the audience, or do you have any questions about this? Do you probably typically hear, well, how am I able to get over the hurdle in the beginning? You just kind of made one obvious here, to being able to make meditation a regular practice in my lifestyle.
Yeah, well, the only way we make anything a regular practice is to ritualize it. We don't do things when we put a timer on and say, oh, at 10 o'clock I'll do this. Because the phone rings, the baby needs attention, the dog needs to go out, suddenly there's an email that engrosses you a little longer. So putting a time on it doesn't work. We have to learn to ritualize it. Just like we ritualize our teeth brushing, and it's just like we ritualize, we're doing showering and doing our hair or our makeup or going to the bathroom, any of those things. We actually do them in a very specific order every single morning, because doing it in that order saves us time. We don't have to think, should I get in the shower or should I brush my teeth? Should I go to the bathroom or should I walk the dog? When we have it in those ritualized ways, we do it efficiently, and we don't even think about it. And so if we can feel that same way, it's just a choice, about even taking just a few minutes every morning to meditate and just follow our breath in and out. You don't need to do any special other technique, just watching your breath as it moves into you and out of you. And when you drift away to a thought, which you will, of course, then you just drift back to your breath. And you can just keep drifting back to your breath. And that's the process, gentle drifting back and forth. Science now shows that effortless drifting back and forth, that's the thing that delivers all these positive results about meditation. So the technique that I developed was RPM, rise, P, meditate. And so that way, if you can
I like that
get up, and the very first thing, or the second thing you do after you wake up, is to spend even a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes in stillness and silence, then everything changes and everything can shift for you. And it's really just take 1 minute from all your other morning ablution rituals. Take 1 minute away from scratching your head in the shower or staring into the mirror. Or take a minute away from walking a dog, or take a minute away from all those other things that you do. You've got 5 minutes. You've got 10 minutes. And we know everyone has 16 seconds. So a technique that I do for very, 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 very beginning meditators is to, as you wake up, sit up in bed, rest your back against your headboard before you do anything, and just breathe and just follow your breath in and out. Ultimately, that can become a gratitude practice. Ultimately, that can become a prayer practice. Ultimately, that can become a foundation for your daily, meditation practice or a forgiveness practice. But just spending 5 minutes, because here's what science is now saying. It's what we do in those first hours that we start our day that create the trajectory for the rest of our day. There's now new research that shows people who watch negative news stories on TV at the end of the day, 14 hours later, report, I think 28% report a higher rate of that their day was not a good day.
I can believe that.
And if we can start with positive news stories, then that's the ripple that we bring throughout the day. And if we can really start with a little stillness and silence inside, just calming reflection, then the rest of our day carries that trajectory. There's a little stillness and silence in every single moment. We start becoming less reactive. We start taking things less personally. We don't freak out when we're stuck in traffic. We don't get, really super annoyed when someone says something and it disagrees with our belief system. Mm-hmm. It's really a powerful shift. It's changing the world.
Now, what's fascinating for our listeners to know about Davidji is that there was a time in your life that you spent about 20 years in business, finance, and mergers and acquisitions. Anybody who's even familiar with that or has actually worked in those arenas understands stress is something you allegedly not only come to live with, but you have to become comfortable with if you're going to survive, especially 20 years in this. Now, what was it that changed you to get out of that and say, this just isn't working for me anymore?
I tried an experimental meditation class when I was in college, and there were 12 of us. We sat in a circle, and it was a Zen meditation. Our Zen master stood in the corner. We were instructed to raise our hands when we had a thought come into our awareness. And in his hand, he carried an 18-inch bamboo stick known as a keisaku.
Oh, boy.
And so when we raised our hands, he would come over and thwack us on the back.
Right.
And so I only lasted in that school of meditation a couple of weeks. I found myself lying to my Zen master. And when you're lying to your Zen master, it's time to move on. So over the years, I dabbled in so many different types of meditation techniques from all different philosophies and all ancient teachings. And ultimately, as I got more deeply involved in the corporate world, I meditated less and less. And I used those teachings less and less. And ultimately, I realized at a certain point, I had given up my early morning meditation ritual for an early morning train ride to the World Trade Center. And I had given up my afternoon ritual for a double scotch. And like that, I realized also what was gone in my life was balance. And in the wake of 9/11, I was feeling very, very despondent, and I was walking in southern Manhattan past a row of cardboard boxes that people were living in, and a hand reached out and grabbed my pant leg, and this face peered up at me. And this man said, "What's going to be on your tombstone?" That's a fairly reflective question.
Wow, it certainly is.
And so I
certainly isn't going to be pepperoni and olives, that's for sure.
Right. And so I realized that I was not really living a purpose-driven life, that I wasn't really enjoying or engaged in all the things that I wanted to be, and I was really just showing up for a job, and it was killing me. I was eating my lunch in 5 minutes at my desk while I was on my computer and my Crackberry. I didn't really put any time into self-nourishment. I wasn't paying attention to the important relationships in my life at the time. And so I was really in a very, very bad place. And my wife said, "Well, why don't you quit your job," which is unheard of within the realm that I was in. Nobody quits that. Everyone, just hangs on no matter how miserable they are. She goes, "Why don't you quit that?" And there's this guy, Deepak Chopra. He's teaching a meditation retreat in Oxford, England. You should check that out. So I went there and I checked it out. And within 4 days of really meditating for like 8 hours a day, so much of the pain really drifted away from my heart. And so much clarity came into my awareness. And probably for the first time in 20 years, I really was experiencing joy. And then I said to Deepak, "So what do I do now that the week is over?" He said, "Why don't you head off to India?" So I headed off to India in search of the guru, searching high and low for the guru. And it was really after about 5.5 months that I realized, guess what? The guru rests inside. Mm-hmm. The answer to every single question we could ever ask rests inside. We just have to be willing to allow the stillness and silence that's inside of us to become present. Because in that stillness and in that silence, you can hear the whispers of your heart. And that, for me, that was the profound shift. And I made a commitment, in that moment that I was going to keep learning and studying every possible technique to bring me to that state, which wasn't a spiritual state. It wasn't a kooky state. It was my state of true clarity. And so, for the past 15 years, I've been teaching this to other people, writing books, and traveling the world, sharing with everyone from kids to bankers to, Wall Street occupiers and everybody in between.
Now, here's something that I think a lot of people, as they look at meditation and they hear the claims or they read the claims, whichever direction they get their information, is that you can come to bring yourself into a blissful state. And I think sometimes they'll get to a point of thinking, so I can be like this 24 hours a day, that there's somehow this mystical achievement of getting to this heightened enlightenment and blissful state. Yet there's also been known to be people who, as they meditate and they begin to open that clarity as you're talking about, they begin to see the deeper sides, perhaps even the shadow side of themselves that might make them a little nuts. Have you heard or have you experienced those kinds of things with people that you work with or even yourself?
Yes, that's a great question, and I think it's a very, very common experience for people who begin a meditation practice, if you're willing to actually stick with it and do it for a month. You start to see results in 3 days. If everyone listening just did 16 seconds 3 or 4 times a day, within 3 days, you'd say, "Whoa, my life is totally different now." But to truly take it to the next level, just like we have to exercise any muscle in our body, we need to exercise the practice. Now, if you show up every single day, what happens is a lot of the layers that you have put up to either push people out or to define yourself start to drift away. Mm-hmm. All the studies involving kids and meditation is that very, very quickly there's less bullying that happens in schools where kids meditate, because you start to see the world more in it's actually a brainwave that can show us that. But you start to see the world as more of a oneness, just like you don't see your left hand and your right hand as separate entities. Mm-hmm. And you start to see other people are really, you know what, they're sort of just like me. So you start to see that. What it also allows you to do is be a little more tender and compassionate with yourself, and that allows you to maybe reflect a little more deeply on the choices you've made and on the people who've hurt you or that you've hurt in your life. So, yes, you start to become a little more aware of everything, mm-hmm. aware of people's emotions, aware of your own emotions, aware of things outside of yourself. So in that awareness of your own emotions, that can scare some people sometimes. They're like, oh, I thought I was perfect, but I've been holding a grudge for 20 years.
Right.
Or I actually, love Bernie Sanders and I want to vote for him, but I can't let anyone know because I don't want people to think that I'm like Bernie Sanders. So I'll make believe I'm not. There's so many things that we pretend so that the rest of the world accepts us or likes us or is happy with us. And meditation just allows you to see those things. Then, of course, you have a choice. But if you are willing to surrender to that process, you become a more authentic version of yourself. And I think this is even more important for people in the second half of their life than it is for people in the first half. Mm-hmm. Because by the second half of your life, it's very easy to become very, very rigid. Like, this is who I am. Too bad. Let them deal with it. I've got an 88-year-old dad who's like a rock star. And just in the last few years, he started to meditate. And he's also shooting his age in golf. He's shooting like 85, 86. So I don't know. I don't know that we can attribute the meditation to that. But he's calmer. He's more accepting. He's more forgiving. So it's anecdotal evidence, but I see it, in one of my prized pupils, who's my dad, who pretty much taught me everything else other than this one thing. So I think everyone has a choice. Do you want to be more aware of everything in the world? And of course, this process, as it sparks our memory and increases our memory, we're going to have more realistic memories about our past and about our choices, not so much revisionist history, but more accurate history. But one of the most important things is, combined in that process, you start to forgive yourself. You start to see things more clearly, so that you don't hold on to things that no longer serve you. And most of us have been doing that for decades.
Yeah, and I think that when, for instance, Zen and the Eastern philosophies were first being introduced to the West, again, as I was saying earlier, people came to see, well, if I do this meditation, then somehow I'm going to get to this blissful state. And as you were joking earlier in the program about, don't worry, you're not going to levitate, but there's this belief that that's that possibility, that I think their expectations get to a point that can seem unreasonable. And so,
absolutely, Daniel.
Yeah, and when you take a look at meditation, the reason I wanted to bring that up is I wanted to just see what your thoughts on are as you get to that point that I guess, call it the ego or all the layers or all the things in yourself that you came to believe about who you are begin to rise, that you may even get to a point that you're feeling like you're going maybe a little bit mad or crazy. And some people might even, because they don't know what to do, as they may not have experienced the extremities of those particular feelings or those emotions, might act out in negative ways. What then could you suggest a person who may be doing this on their own, saying, I heard this is going to give me clarity. I'm going to start feeling better about my day. I'm going to be more present in the moment, maybe even more happy, more blissful. But what do I do with this? How do I manage this? Who do I go and see about that? Where that someone isn't going to say, for instance, no, I think psychologically you've fallen off your rocker, and here's some Ritalin or Prozac to maybe help you over that.
Yeah, I've seen that in such rare situations where people really have this. Out of 100 people that I'll teach, maybe out of 500 people that I'll teach, one person will say, "I've just been exposed to the dark aspect of myself."
Okay.
And I've never looked at myself before like this. And so, you can always say, well, are you manic depressive? Do you have other type of psychological challenges? But I think that it's really a great tool for the other 499 people, and I'm just coming up with this statistic based on my own experience.
Sure.
The other 499 people are going to say, wow, I never knew there was such beauty in the world. I never knew that I could just sit in nature and feel so great. I never knew I could watch a sunset or a sunrise or watch, the clouds just move through the sky because I've been too busy to ever even look up. I've been too busy chasing this other thing. I've been too worried about money. I've been too worried about if I'm going to die alone. I've been too worried about will I be loved again. And so really what happens is those worries start to dissipate. And it's funny because everyone wants the sexy part of any practice. So like when I'm teaching kids, they're like, "Can you teach me to levitate?"
And, I want to levitate to the 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee where I don't have to walk. But see, you're pointing out exactly the kind of goals or expectations sometimes people have because of perhaps how they got the information that led them to make a choice like that in the first place.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. We're in a society of spontaneous fulfillment of desire. Everyone's like, I want enlightenment now. Well, guess what? Probably while you're in this physical body, you can become a little lighter. That's what enlightenment is. But who knows if you're going to suddenly transcend all things and magically, come back as some Buddha to guide others. There are some really special people, but they're just a handful that we're so aware. The Mother Teresa's of the world, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. These are people who, first of all, they have a team of people taking care of all of their other needs. That's one thing we should just all acknowledge. And at the same time, they are committed solely towards healing. So they're never worrying about a mortgage payment. They're never worrying about, my car broke down. They're never worrying about, what about my kids? They're never worrying about, I hope I get that raise. They made a very specific choice to follow a very specific path in life. So when we see them, I'll just use those two people who clearly dedicated their lives to serving others. Even they did not transcend this reality. Even they did not become enlightened. But I will say something about the mindset that they both carry, that we all can carry, and that was when Mother Teresa was washing the feet of the lepers in Calcutta. She said, I'm actually washing God's feet. Mm-hmm. And so she felt that, she believed that, she was in service to that, and she felt she was even getting away with something because here I am, I get to sit around with God all day long and wash God's feet. And, we don't have those same type of, we haven't chosen that same type of life. We can all just pick up right now and move to India and start washing lepers' feet. But it's not going to be the same thing. We have to find the thing in this life, here, wherever we are living right now, that allows us to live in service, that allows us to do what we love, that allows us to connect. And these little techniques of de-stressifying and meditation can powerfully make that happen. You start to see the world with new eyes, even when you start this process at 70 years of age.
You remind me of something that I'd like to share where we were out at the coast, the Oregon coast, with a friend of ours. And it was a beautiful day out there on that particular day, slightly breezy, but just a wonderful day to be out at the coast. And there was a subtle thing inside of me that felt that this friend of ours was just off, like she just wasn't there. But, the smile was there and the conversation was certainly there and all that. And I think it was about a day or so later we got an email where she was very excited to share with us the fact that miracles do happen. And she had described how, as we were out at the coast, she spent the whole day with us pretty much worrying about how she was going to come up with the money for her rent within the next couple of days. And then she went on to say how this client had come in and discovered that she was a month behind in her payment for services and had paid her in cash, which was easily enough money to pay off the rent. And it reminded me of a time when I was out with my own children at the river we were fishing, and it turned into, they ended up jumping in and splashing around. It was a nice warm day for that. We didn't catch any fish, but they certainly enjoyed themselves. But I remembered in that day there was a particular situation that I was thinking about through the day that took me out of the enjoyment of watching my children and perhaps my opportunity to jump in and splash around with them, just took me out of that moment and that day. And I can see, and for the listeners out there, this, I think, is one of the most powerful things to consider why even 16 seconds of meditation in a single day, that you can be in that moment and don't allow your mind to cloud something that hasn't even happened yet, to really enjoy those moments that are happening in front of you. That is a true benefit.
Yes, it's a powerful benefit, and it happens very, very stealthily, and it's really taking stock of the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Can we choose to be present? And we can do it intellectually. We can say, I want to stop thinking about that conversation I had last week with so-and-so. We can do it, intellectually. We can say, I just want to stop that. We can say, I know I shouldn't fear this, but there's so much uncertainty, and I need that certainty, and so I'm going to continue to fear it until I get that certainty. And guess what? That certainty may never come. Mm-hmm. And so we don't do anything with those fears or emotions. What we do is place our attention on something else, like 16 seconds. And there are many, many throughout the book, De-stressifying. That's really why I wrote De-stressifying, so people could have all these different tools in the moment, present moment tools, to bring them out of their fear, so we don't do anything with fear. It's sort of like if you walk into a dark room, you don't do anything with the darkness, you turn on the light. And that changes the room from dark to light. So we don't do anything when we're living in the past or the future in our heads. We don't do anything with that. We drift our attention or bring our attention to something else in the present moment. And that can be looking at nature, looking at your kids playing, watching a bird fly, following your breath in and out, doing something that you love that feels so good to you, whether that's gardening or cooking, or knitting or weaving or anything along those lines. There are certain things where it suddenly brings us into the zone, and in those zones, time stands still. It hasn't been proven that gardening has the same benefits on the brain as meditation, but it certainly is a present moment activity. And so whether that's riding a bike, whether that's going for a swim, all those types of things connect us to nature, which connects us to the now, which allows us to see a little bigger perspective. And suddenly we realize, guess what? We're on this third rock from the sun with 8 billion people and a whole bunch of animals in a giant solar system that's filled, to capacity inside a galaxy, and there are many galaxies tumbling into each other. And then you realize, is the fact that I didn't get that email from that person who said they were going to send it to me, how important is that in the grand scheme of things?
Exactly. I know, it's funny. I was just thinking as you were describing a lot of that also as being in the present moment. We're talking about really neat states of seeing a bird on a branch or, the blue sky, whatever it may be. But think about pain, for instance, physical pain. And for some reason, the movie G.I. Jane came up where the DI says, pain is your friend because pain lets you know that you're still alive. And how many of us maybe in the middle of the night have decided we had to get up and go to the bathroom and the kid left the Lego block on the floor and you stepped on that? Boy, that really brings you to the present moment, doesn't it? Now, guided meditation can be pretty important, especially for those starting out. Tell us about that.
Starting out, that's the reason that I started many years ago, I developed this concept called the 21-day meditation challenge. About in 2009, and I did 5 of those, where just like for 21 days, there's a little bit of a teaching, and then there's just say 5 minutes of silence, and I introduce a tool or a method to practice during those 5 minutes. And so that was pretty successful. We got several 100,000 people listening to those, and it's a great way for people to dip their toe into the water. Since then, I've created, I don't know, maybe 700-800 of these types of guided meditations, where there's a little music in the background and there's a little conversation, and it allows people to gently go in, because you're right. So much of what we've been taught is, oh, you want to learn to transcend reality? You want to learn to become enlightened? Here's the technique. And so after like 5 minutes of meditating, people are like, Jesus didn't whisper in my ear. The Buddha didn't show up. What's going on here? I was supposed to get enlightened. And so I think if we can just be gentle with the practice and just be gentle with ourselves, that we'll really start to see these very, very small shifts. You know, it's like when an ocean liner crosses the Atlantic Ocean. If they find themselves off course by a mile, they don't adjust their calibration by a mile. They just adjust the calibration by the teeniest amount, 1/50th of a degree, and that suddenly changes the trajectory of the ship as it moves closer to, wherever it's going. The same thing comes for ourselves, and this is a really important step, because it doesn't matter how old you are. The slightest little shifts in behavior, the slightest little shifts in attention make powerful, powerful transformations 2 days, 5 days, 25 days, 6 months down the road.
Yeah, it's interesting how the ripple effects actually occur, and that's what you should be paying attention to, is the ripple effect itself. You drop the pebble, there's a very strong ripple effect, but as it gets larger and larger in the pond, it becomes more and more subtle, as you're saying. Then it gets to a point where it reaches the end, and then it bounces and reverberates back, and pretty soon you're noticing a whole new world, perhaps a month or 6 months or a year down the road. And if someone was able to come and see you as they knew you a year ago and tell you this is who you were a year ago, you would probably be astounded at just how profound that change really was.
Yeah, it's like, if someone lives with you, you don't really notice them changing, and if someone visits you every 6 months, you notice their hair color, or their height, their weight, everything about them. It's the same thing. The impact is so subtle, and we start to take it for granted. Suddenly, when we have, we haven't slept well for maybe 10 years, and suddenly we have a good night's sleep, we don't attribute that to this cute little meditation thing I'm doing actually gave me a good night's sleep. We don't go there. We instead say, I'll take that for granted. It must be because, and we give something else the credit for that. Suddenly, when we've strung together 2 months of sleeping well, we would say, oh yeah, I always sleep well. We wouldn't necessarily give the credit where the obvious credit would be due. So I think it's the majority of impact with meditation doesn't happen when we meditate. It's not about, did I see God? Did I become enlightened? Did I levitate? It's more about when you open your eyes after the meditation's over and you're back here with the rest of us, were you kinder to yourself today? Mm-hmm. Did you feel more fulfilled in your conversations? Did you whine, complain, and grieve less today? Did you notice that there was a little more gratitude in something that you did? That's where the powerful impact of meditation takes hold in your life. It's in those little moments when your eyes are open, where suddenly you see your grandchild, well, suddenly you thought you would respond in a bark, and instead you just stood there and witnessed, because you said to yourself, I don't need to be right now. I can allow someone else to be right in this moment. I think I enjoy the peace that me not being right really brings.
And not get upset when you discover that you're wrong, because you just discovered a different way of doing things.
Right.
See, and I love that you brought these up, Davidji, because, again, overreaching for what you believe, the expectation that something like meditation will bring you, will certainly bring disappointment, and then you may abandon the practice altogether. But as you pointed out, let's take a look at the simplicities it will give you. Would you like a better night's rest? Do you think you'll get up the next day smiling rather than being grouchy that you have to face a day? You know, are you someone that now you're going to be making different decisions, even under stress, where people might look at you and say, wow, you just seem so calm and even passive at some situations. That's kind of neat. How can I have that happen? You know, that you have better relationships with people, that you just really enjoy your day no matter what comes at you, to the point where whether it's a good situation or a bad situation, that you'll come to a potential point that either one of them are okay.
Yeah, and a beginner mistake is people suddenly experience a little more calm and they try to inflict it or impose it on somebody else.
Oh boy, yeah.
And you said it perfectly. No, just live it, and then someone will say, "Hey, I would never have responded so calmly. What are you taking? Can I get a prescription for that?" And that's what you start to, or people say, "Hey, did you have some work done? Those age spots, those age lines on your face aren't there anymore. Did you have like some Botox or some Restylane or something like that?" We really start to see people saying, "I didn't expect that out of you, but whatever it is, I'd like a little bit."
Mm-hmm. Now, you also provide guided meditation videos that stream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on what is known as Grokker.com, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is that the Grokker?
Yes, you are.
Okay, JROKKER.com. And that's the Wellness Video Network, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, tell us what people can expect there, and I know that there is a wonderful offer that we'd like to give the Beyond 50 listeners out there who want to, let's say, not only maybe stick their toes into the swimming pool, but maybe jump in and go for a swim when it comes to meditation.
Yeah, Grokker has been a very sweet relationship that I think I've been working with them for over 2 years, and they're committed to, they have videos on basic lifestyle videos, cooking, yoga, and they reached out to me a few years ago and said, we don't have any meditation experts. Would you be willing to do a video series, guided meditation on various topics to help our viewers? And like I said, I've recorded hundreds of guided meditations on audio, but I had never done a video series. And they are beautifully produced. They're powerful. I had so much fun working with that team, and I really, a lot of people have said to me that just watching those videos has re-engaged their daily practice. So Grokker, there was a book, I think Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein back in the 70s, and he invented the term, or coined the term, to grok something means to own it, to know it so completely that it essentially becomes part of your very essence. And so I think that's why they came up with the name Grokker, because when you're watching it, you will ultimately have those teachings, whether it's how to cook something, how to exercise, or how to meditate, woven into every fiber of your being.
Mm-hmm. I can see that becoming a wonderful hip-hop phrase, "you've been grokked." What does that mean? Well, right. You've been owned. And so tell us about the special offer you'd like to pass on to the Beyond 50 listeners.
Well, I don't really know what that special offer is, to tell you the truth.
I think what it is that you can go on Grokker.com, and it gives them a chance to participate in the guided meditation, and that everyone listening today with the code, Be a Better You, they can go there and put that in, and for 3 months they'll be able to go on there with the premium membership and actually use it for free, as I understand.
Oh, well, that's just great, because there are literally hundreds and hundreds of different teachers, and therefore thousands of videos in those areas. So I wasn't really sure. I didn't want to misspeak because it sounded too good. So I figured I would let you share that. But that's a great deal.
Mm-hmm. And I think the most important takeaway, and certainly I'd like this to come from your own words, as you've been, again, around the world, you've helped thousands of people. It isn't necessarily that you're changing the life, but you're actually taking and becoming a better you just as you are, which can be a marvelous thing to have.
Yeah, everything that I teach and everything that I talk about, whether it's at my retreats or teacher trainings, and pretty much, what I'm trying to teach people is to awaken something that's actually there. I'm not giving anyone anything. I'm providing sort of a conduit for people to awaken what's already resting beneath the surface that they have either suppressed or not allowed or weren't aware. And so really, it's already a part of you. This is a journey for all of us, whether we're 5, 15, or 105 years old. We're still learning. I've yet to meet the person, no matter how old they are, who says, I got it all. We're all in the process of becoming our best version. Mm-hmm. And so I think through the process of de-stressifying, that allows us to heighten our emotional intelligence. It allows us to communicate more consciously. It allows us to better identify our needs and then meet them. It allows us to truly grasp why am I here right now? What's my purpose in life right now, right here? And because that changes over time. And certainly as we age, we suddenly move into different areas, sometimes for really great reasons, sometimes for not the best reasons. And this allows us to see with greater clarity where my life is, where I've come from, and where I'm going.
Well, very good. Davidji, it's been certainly a pleasure to have you here on the program today to inspire those out there to realize where you are right now is good, but how would you like to just be a little bit better than that? That's certainly, as you were saying, a choice that we can all make. People can find out more about you by visiting where?
Well, you can visit my website, which is davidji.com, davidji.com. And from there, you can access videos, meditations. You can be part of our Sweet Spot community. There are discounts on all the different programs and types of processes that people can access. And you can get De-stressifying there or on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or any place on the planet where books are sold. And it wasn't a word last week, but now De-stressifying is officially a word now that the book is out.
Well, somebody had to come up with more words. Shakespeare pretty much cornered the market for a while on that. Davidji, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel. Such a pleasure. And I wish all of your listeners throughout the world a de-stressifying day, and keep leaning in the direction of your dreams.
And all it takes is just 16 seconds to get started, and you'll find a whole different way to experience and enjoy the world as you're alive to be able to embrace it. I want to thank all the listeners out there for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, live your day past halfway.